Is it 8? I think it's 8. So let's go ahead and get started. This is our cozy meeting. So I'm glad to see we're in the beautiful, cool San Antonio. So for those of you who walked over from the other hotel, please apologize to your neighbor now. But welcome. We're between the columns for the lines of sight. So and if there's any blurriness on the screen behind me, it's my bald head refracting. So anyway, I want to welcome everybody to the PSAC meeting. This is the public portion of the PSAC meeting. So we have guests in the audience. I got to get my notes so I don't mess something up. So we're going to take roll before we get started on our business for the day. And I think that's up to me to do. So here we go. So American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials is excused. Martha Carter from APCO. Present. Phil Mann from APWA. Here. Is that really an acronym? I made it up. It sounded good. Lloyd Mitchell. Lloyd, he's down there.
Yes, I'm here. Can't hardly hear you.
You can't hardly hear me?
That's correct.
Okay. Well. Oh.
Now it starts.
My God.
Here we go.
That was about a minute. I'm impressed. Wow.
Roll call of all things.
I mean, roll call. Come on. Roger Heaton from the Governor's Homeland Security Advisor Council. He's not here yet. Captain Chris Lombard from the Interagency Board.
Here, I'd like to thank you. Actually, Don and Frank would like to thank you guys for putting them between Lloyd, Phil, and myself over here. I think that was your payback for Phil.
I bet he won't do it again. Anyway, Mark Danowski from IACP. Here. Joe Sastry from IAEM. Yes, sir. Chief Gary McCarhar from IAFC. Here. Mark Reichman from ICMA. Here. Paul Zox excused from IMSA. Major City Chiefs, Chief Jonathan Lewin. Major County Sheriffs, Mel Meyer. Present. Metropolitan Fire Chiefs, Niles had 13 hours in the airport and 4 canceled flights, so he will not be here. So we're going to list him as excused. National Association of Counties, Lynn Humphreys. Don Lundy from NAEMT. Okay, I almost got it. Kurt Hagman from the National Association of Regional Councils. Okay. Daryl Ackley also had some travel issues. He'll be in later this morning. Paul Patrick. Here. Richard Taylor. Here. Charlie Sasser. Oh. Okay, situation normal. Okay, Barry Frazier from NATOA. I'm here. Brian Howard from NCAI. Here. John Sweeney from National Criminal Justice Association. Here. Senator Brian Feldman from National Council of State Legislatures. Here. Todd Early from NICSWIC. I like that acronym, NICSWIC. Jeff Stern from National Emergency Management Association. Jonathan Olson was excused. Trey Fogarty, National Emergency Number Association. Here. Jimmy Janot, National Governors Association. Usual Ors is going to be representing the National League of Cities, but he is not here. Yep. Frank Minnessy from IGES, or whatever it is. Hi. inlets. It doesn't say inlets, though. Chief Doug Aiken from NIPSTIC.
Present.
Sheriff Larry Amerson from National Sheriff Association.
Here.
Chief Reed Vaughn from National Volunteer Fire Council.
Here.
Mark Perbix from NCJIS. I'm here. Mark Grubb was excused from SAFECOM. James Mann, one of our non-management responders, was also excused. Fire non-management responder would be Billy Freeman. Thank you, Lieutenant. U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Craig Moyce.
Here, sir.
And U.S. Department of Justice, David Rogers.
Here, good morning.
Good morning. That concludes our roll call. Is there someone I didn't call? Okay. Doing good so far. Contrary to popular opinion, I actually made it through the roll call. Okay, I'll announce that. So first of all, thanks everybody for being here. Really appreciate it. I want to thank you in advance for your participation. I'd like to now to ask you to let's turn to the webinar meeting notes that were distributed. The webinar from April 12th. Interested to know if we have any suggested questions or any suggested edits or questions to those meeting notes. Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to accept them.
Second.
Okay, who moved?
Don Lundy.
Don Lundy, and second?
Trey Fogarty.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, they're approved. Thank you. I'd also like to welcome our two newest PSAC members, Chief Jonathan Lewin from Chicago PD. He's representing the Major City Chiefs Association. So Chief Lewin, thank you for being here. We appreciate it. Welcome. And then, as I said earlier, Yushel Orrs from the National League of Cities will be assuming the role, but we couldn't get all of his paperwork through in time to get him here. So anyway, and I know we have several members that joined since our last in-person meeting that we introduced on the webinar. So thanks to everybody that's here. And we have some people on the call. I know Sue Swenson and Mike Poth. Sue Swenson, our chairman of the board, is on, and Mike Poth is also on. I'd like to just go ahead and move forward with the program, and I'll turn to Jeff Johnson and ask him to give some opening remarks.
Thank you. Well, good morning. On behalf of Chairwoman Swenson and the Board of Directors, thank you all for your work. As you can see, money's a little tight in terms of room space. We thought about holding this in the elevator and then thought, well, maybe this is a little better. It's my pleasure to introduce some board members in attendance. We have Neil Cox over here. We have Kevin McGinnis, Terry Takai, and Governor Douglas. You know, I think this says a lot. These are folks that don't need to be here except for they want to be here, and they want to support the PSAC, and they want to, with their own ears, pick up your contributions to where FirstNet is and where we're going. I probably have one theme for today, and that's to just say thank you. We have arrived at a pretty incredible place. If you were in the audience yesterday to hear my remarks, I think a lot of people said this couldn't be done. I just learned a long time ago there's no utility in writing down what people said so you can remind them how stupid they were later. But because people say what they're going to say for their own reasons, and they do what they're going to do for their own reasons, and they're motivated by things that often aren't visible to us. And that's just the way the world is. But the people sitting around this table and the people in this room today, you were motivated by the right things. and that was to bring a national network through a previously untried, unproven approach to bring a national network to the public safety responders of this country, and to do so, frankly, with the lion's share of the expense of that network being borne by our partner. This whole idea of taking spectrum and monetizing that in a way that pays for the network in a self-sustaining business model, that hasn't been done because it isn't because someone didn't think of it. It's because it seemed insurmountable. And the fact is the first time anyone's tried it. And the fact is, it's proven. And if you saw the offering that AT&T brought forward as a package, and if you haven't, you will after the 19th, if you get some sense of what they brought to the table, this is worldwide a game changer for public safety, to bring mission critical broadband. You know, and you can just go back to all the it's impossible. They will never put chipsets in devices. They will never do it unless you pay them. You will never get spectrum in the money. You will never get money in the spectrum. You'll never be allowed to enterprise it. Customers won't come to the table. Every state will opt out. I can go on and on and on. But the fact is, when the history book is written on this, I will be surprised if in the end, everybody doesn't opt in. I expect everyone to opt in the end. And I expect that this will be wildly successful for our partner and for us. I expect that this will be a worldwide model. And I hope each of you can take some pride in bringing forth the concerns and the perspectives of the group that you represent. And you've poured it in here. Even setting up this PSAC was not easy to maneuver in terms of the federal regulation and getting you seated here and creating the structure around how you contribute. None of it was easy. And I want to thank you. I wish I could trace your DNA to every aspect of this RFP, because if we could, I think you would be impressed to see your individual and your collective DNA all over the outcome we got. So on behalf of Sue and the board of directors, thank you all for your contributions. And if I could levy a prediction, now it gets interesting. We move from the strategic place of bringing FirstNet to responders. Now we move into the operational piece. And it is those of you sitting around this table that are going to have the greatest insights into the operational needs, the operational tweaks, and the operational contributions that are going to pour into this network. So while it's been very good, and you should be very proud of yourself, now comes the really fun stuff and the really enjoyable stuff, and truly a whole nother lake of uncharted water. So with that, it's all you.
I'm going to try to get, I don't know if it's going to reach.
I'll have to project. Oh, there we go.
Oh my God, look at that.
Always hard to follow Jeff, but I have to reiterate, I mean, I think the thing that's most impressive looking around the room today, one, is a lot of faces who have been here from the very beginning. And by the beginning, I mean even long before FirstNet was created. You helped fight to get this legislation passed. You fought to get the spectrum set aside and additional spectrum to be able to fight for funding to make this happen. You also stuck with the effort throughout the good times and the bad times, and really made sure that you fought hard to get the network that public safety deserves. And I think we're quite lucky to all be a part of seeing this come to fruition. And I think what's most exciting now is it's going to happen much faster than most of us probably would have predicted a few years ago. And I think that's the most exciting part. Operations and execution on this network is going to begin now, and it has. And it's exciting to see the core network work that's going on today. It's really exciting to see that we're going to be getting out state plans next week, and the work that's going to go on to go through the opt-in, opt-out process and start deploying this network, but most importantly to start using it. And what's great about, I think, the PSAC is the amazing amount of coverage we have of all the public safety and local government associations that make really this network work, because it's about meeting your needs. And I think what's been great through the RFP process and through all the consultation that's gone on is I think we've done I'll say the team has done an amazing job of trying to listen and incorporate that and to bring forward a network that will meet and exceed the needs of public safety in the field. And what's so exciting, I was able to spend some time with just one of the associations, Major City Chiefs. Chief Lewin hosted us in Chicago just a few weeks ago, and we had about 16 of the largest metropolitan areas in the country get together. And what's great is to look at the amazing innovation that folks like Chief Lewin sitting around this table here are doing right now in the city of Chicago, and how that is having an effect, leveraging technology to really improve preventing crime, to improve responding to issues in neighborhoods, and to really leverage technology in a way that puts the power of the responses in the hands of police officers in the field, just as one example. And he's doing it today in certain precincts, but I think when you look at having a network like FirstNet, what can happen across the entire city of Chicago, what can happen across this entire country. And what's amazing to me is the sharing that's going on between law enforcement, between fire agencies, between emergency medical services agencies, to make sure that we're leveraging this technology to really improve safety, to really change the effectiveness of what we're doing, and that's amazing, I think. And I think the innovation that we're going to see over just the next year or two, starting to come out with the ability to have a prioritized and then a preemptive network this year. That's incredibly exciting, way ahead of schedule for what people thought could happen, and really having access to a nationwide network at the very beginning as soon as states opt into this network is an incredible opportunity. Having our network operator ready to do that here next month, I think, is pretty amazing, and really is going to change the ability that you can get on this network here this year. And I think that's so exciting. And I know we have a lot of experienced folks around the table here, and folks that are in some cases even getting close to the end of their careers. And I've seen a 1 or 2 retirement notices this year. I'm looking at Larry over there. He's smiling. He's happy. But what's great is he gets to see this happen. And I think it's so important because you've been a part of this, and this is happening right now. It's not 5 years from now. It's not 3 years from now. And the ability to really make the most of what this network can do for us is really in the hearts and minds of the police officers, the sheriff's deputies, the firefighters, the paramedics, the EMTs that work for you and with you and are part of your associations. And I think the innovation that we're going to see from that generation of folks who want to leverage this technology in ways that even some of us around this room can't even think of today. And I think what they're going to come up with to be able to leverage broadband to provide better services in your community, I just think is exponential. And I think we can't even imagine 5 years from now what's going to be going on. So it's an exciting time. I can't thank you enough for the input that you've done to make this network a reality. And I can't thank the FirstNet team and AT&T and all the partners who have come together to make this happen, because it is hard work. There's lots of hard work left to do, but it's also going to be very fun to see it happen and be in the hands of our public safety personnel across the country. So it's a very exciting time. I'm glad to have Tom here at the helm of the PSAC to drive this through to fruition, and it's just going to be a lot of fun to make it happen. And it's good. Could all be on Tom's shoulders, but it's really about all of you. It really is, and I can't wait to see you really leverage your associations and participation to make it the best network that it can be. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those kind words of, I don't know, everybody congratulated me when I got the chair position. A couple of people offered condolences. I'm beginning to wonder if they were more accurate, but just kidding. I too want to add my excitement to the comments that were just made. I think there's a great opportunity for the PSAC to continue to offer timely advice, and we're going to have a topic item late in the agenda today to talk about how we're going to do that. But we're really moving from the planning. A lot of our task teams were research kind of oriented, and we're going to have to really plug in and offer timely advice on implementation issues and those sorts of things. So it's going to be an exciting time for us. Just a reminder, we sent out an email to everyone that for the PSAC members, we are doing photos. I was told by some of the law enforcement representatives to stop calling them headshots. But we are doing photos back in the back room in the closet there, so on the break or lunch or whatever, if you could please make your way back there. It takes literally like 90 seconds. It's very quick. So I appreciate that. We're now going to move to our working group updates. I'd like to to thank the chairs before they start, because they put in a lot of hours coordinating these calls. That generally we do all of our business by call, so coordinating the calls, the agendas, the meeting notes, the tasks, and you know, as you all know, we're all volunteers, and for them to step up and do that, it's really a great service to all of us and to our constituency. So I'm going to start with Todd Early with the Early Builder Working Group.
Thanks, Tom. You see the chart that's up there on the screen. I'm not going to go over all of that. The site numbers really haven't changed much since the last time, and they've pretty much remained static on the site numbers. So I'm going to give you a little bit of update, quick update on the projects, and then some of the coordination that's being done between the projects and AT&T. Regarding Adams County, Colorado, inclement weather caused some issues at a couple of their sites around their office tower, and they're in the process of restoring that equipment. They had USB drive test data around Denver International Airport with Fusion IVR modems for updating neighbor lists, and 2 of those sites at Denver International Airport are on the air now. And then they're working on optimizing coverage in Brighton. Regarding LA RICS, I wanted to take the time to introduce retired Chief from LA County, Scott Edson's in the room with us back here. Scott is the new Executive Director of LA RICS and been involved in public safety and data sharing and everything with many of us in the room for quite some time, so we're glad to see him over there as well. Regarding that project, the technical staff in LA County Network Operations have begun training on various network elements in preparation for assuming full control of the network operations. They received formal funding approval for their rapid response deployables, some sites on wheels. They're also seeking additional funding for approval to co-locate LTE equipment on some of their LMR towers in an effort to add 20 additional LTE sites. They've also been pretty busy working with the City of Inglewood and developers on the new NFL stadium for the LA Rams and Chargers, as well as the Chargers' temporary facility in Carson to make sure that there's Band 14 coverage and capability within those locations. Regarding the New Jersey project, New Jersey supported an air show Memorial Day weekend at Millville Army Airfield in a recent Princeton University alumni reunion weekend, first part of June. They've done significant drive testing along the Route 21 corridor in Newark to understand and really optimize the coverage that they've received in those areas. New Mexico, they continue to explore moving their eNode B and eNode B to Santa Fe to analyze existing state law and leases pertaining to signability and disallowing infrastructure for commercial use. And then last but surely not least, the Texas project in Harris County just most recently supported the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. They had a lot of great success there and built off really the lessons learned from the previous year, and then the installation of a lot of dedicated equipment that was installed at NRG Stadium from the Super Bowl. I want to take just a second to talk a little bit about the Super Bowl and the deployment that was done by the Harris County team back in February. It was really a year-long process of coordinating with public safety. It's the first time we've seen in public safety, in my opinion, the incorporation of data communications and capabilities and applications from day one of the communications planning process. And it proved successful. They deployed approximately 200 devices at the Super Bowl. I went up there and visited with first responders firsthand, and a lot of success and a lot of lessons learned for public safety. I'll tell you that really, when you look at this thing and you start looking at the data incorporation into public safety, they had various applications, but one of the main applications that they used was really kind of a messaging application. And just to show you the impact that it really had, they had approximately almost 7,000 messages that were sent across that data application. That specific application was viewed over 50,000 times. So that shows you really how the impact was received in that, and they have some use cases and success stories in the use of that, where they were able to actually capture a wanted person and other things where they were able to distribute information either within their operational units or distribute information to everybody all at one time, which reduces the amount of inaccuracies because it's going from the source to the people all at one time. And I really think it was a huge success, and there's an after action being done on the use at the Super Bowl as well. I think we still have a lot of work to do when it comes to incorporating this type of technology and data into our comm unit planning. And we're already having discussions on that with FirstNet. We've had discussions with FEMA. We've actually brought them down to actually look at some comm exercises and things that are going on with each other. So I think that's really important as well. If you can go to the next slide, please. The last thing is that FirstNet CTO office has worked with the early builders prior to the award to come up with a template that would allow the early builders to really identify all of the infrastructure and things that they've put into these early builder projects to convey that to the awardee, which is now AT&T, to make sure that they were able to start having those engagements sooner than later. And I'll tell you, personally, I pushed very hard for AT&T executive management to engage the early builders early on, and I can tell you within the first 2 weeks after the award, they started having those meetings and engagements and continue to have that dialogue with the early builders. And so they're having those discussions now to figure out what of that infrastructure they can leverage and utilize and how it would be integrated if that decision was made by the early builder and by the state, opt-in or opt-out process, how that would work. So I'm pleased with the progress on that and appreciate their attention to that and for their recognition of all the work that these early builder projects have really done as well. And that's the update I've got. Tom, do you have any more input on the Super Bowl? Tom was the communications lead up there for the Super Bowl and highly involved in this from day one and the person that brought everybody in from day one.
The only thing I would say is that you have to use the technology to solve problems, not just because it's the cool technology. And that, to me, was the key to success, was we went and met repeatedly with the end users. We came up with a list of 10 to 12 apps in the beginning, and we started field testing them, and ultimately we ended up with basically 2 apps because it was too kludgy. I don't know, that's probably not a word, but single sign-on is one of the biggest things that we need, because, especially if we're in sharing devices mode, which many of us are. So, but it went very well. First responders always find unique ways to do things, and this was no exception. So we learned a lot, and I think you'll be interested to read the after action when we get it done. We're almost finished with it, so thank you. Okay, I think we're now going to Craig Moyse, the Federal Working Group Chair.
So I was elevated up from the vice chair to the chair position approximately 2 months ago, and I've been reaching out to the federal community to get federal law enforcement community to get them involved in this initiative. Been meeting with a little bit of reluctance for all the things that Jeff talked about and then some. These guys are kind of, the culture is LMR, and they're planting their feet on LMR, and LMR is going to be what we're going to use. And I am of the disposition that if you think LMR is the future, I'd like to introduce you to some people who bought Kodak stock and things of that nature. So times are changing, and I believe my personal opinion is this is an awesome initiative, and we need to be on the forefront of this, not trying to play catch up once this thing starts taking hold. So my mandate is to reach out to the federal community and the federal law enforcement community, that is, and get their involvement in this moving forward. Anybody any questions for me? I'll be here all week. Try the veal.
Oh, there's a laugh track going to be associated with all future PSAC meetings. Now I'd like to go to Brian Howard, the chair of our Tribal Working Group.
Hi, yes. Good morning, everyone. I haven't had a chance to meet everyone in person. This is my first in-person meeting. I was just appointed by the National Congress of American Indians back in February. It's a little bit of background. I actually worked for NCAI for about 6 years as a legislative associate on telecommunications issues. So I was actually there when FirstNet was authorized by Congress in February 2012, and NCAI was actually the first tribal association that the Department of Commerce reached out regarding tribal consultation. Fast forward now, and after I left NCAI, there had a turnover in our appointees, so they decided to appoint me. So I'm still working for NCAI, I guess. But one of the things that we've been really focused on is trying to get a draft tribal consultation policy approved by the tribal working group. Again, like I said, when I was at NCAI, this was one of our top priorities because of the way that the legislation was written and kind of overlooked tribes in terms of the deployment aspects. And so we finally adopted a tribal consultation policy that I understand was also adopted by the PSAC Executive Committee recently. And so that will be going forward to the Board of Directors next. But basically, the consultation aspects in terms of a government-to-government relationship between the FirstNet Authority and tribal governments would formally kind of be established once the state governors have made their decisions on the final RAN deployment plans. One of the main priorities regarding the policy has been that given the unique public safety challenges that exist in Indian country and all of the different jurisdictions that oversee public safety in Indian country, whether that be tribally run in terms of 638 contracts or federally run in terms of Bureau of Indian Affairs or even in the Indian Health Service and all of the different EMS functionalities on Indian country. The tribal working group understood that there needed to be a more formalized plan in place for FirstNet to work directly with tribes and also to oversee the different deployment aspects when it would come to AT&T as the primary partner in this relationship. So we're very excited about that. One of the other items is we've been reviewing applications for an attorney or law firm that has expertise in federal Indian law. Federal Indian law speaking broadly, not just about telecommunications, but also issues with dealing with rights-of-way on tribal lands. You know, how do you work with the Bureau of Indian Affairs to expedite that process? How do you work with tribes in dealing with individual allottees that have fee simple title to those lands, and also dealing with tribal governments that also manage the other majority of tribal lands. So there's a lot of those different issues in terms of the right-of-way, but also in terms of subcontracting. If there's going to be new infrastructure deployment on tribal lands, what is that going to look like? How is AT&T and FirstNet Authority going to work with tribal governments and also tribally owned and operated businesses? So those are just two of the main kind of things that we've been looking at in terms of legal expertise related to those matters, so that once the actual deployment occurs on tribal lands, hopefully FirstNet won't run into issues that are seen as barriers to expedited deployment and giving that to our first responders. And finally, just the next thing is we're going to be having our in-person meeting on July 24th in Flagstaff. It'll actually be on the Navajo Nation at the Twin Arrows Resort and Casino, and then we'll also be attending the Tribal Interior Budget Committee, which is a meeting hosted by the Department of Interior, Bureau of Indian Affairs, and the Indian Health Service also tags onto it, but it's primarily a budget meeting to talk about different service, equipment, funding needs in Indian country related to public safety, schools, and other different types of infrastructure projects. Thank you.
So I'd just like to say for the group, Brian has done a great job jumping in and kind of leading this group. It's a challenging group, and we brought forth a draft. FirstNet provided a draft tribal consultation policy. I want to say it was in December, and Brian led the group to get those pretty significant changes into that policy, and he's correct. We did either we did it yesterday or it's going to be done today or tomorrow. Transmit those changes over to FirstNet to consider for the final version of the policy. So very excited about moving forward with that group. They have a lot of unique challenges, and they're not shy. So it's good that they're going to share with us kind of how they hope to help us solve some of those issues. That, Brian has been really good at kind of getting them focused on how, we know there's problems, but how do we fix them? And so that's really, really encouraging. So thank you, Brian, for all your hard work. Paul, you have something?
Yeah, so I just wanted to chime in as well and thank Brian for his hard work. It was really interesting over the past little while as liaison with the PSAC EC, with the Tribal Working Group, and back to Harlan. We mentioned his name twice now, and some of the conversations and Skypes we had during some of those meetings, to see Brian come in and do such an outstanding job in helping to turn that group around, I think needs to be noted by the PSAC. He's done an excellent job in getting to that point, and having this consultation plan approved is a huge step forward. I mean, it is something that I didn't think would happen, and I know Tom and I were texting back and forth when it was approved at the last meeting, saying like, wow, this is amazing that they worked so hard on that. So to Brian, thank you so much, and I'm very excited about the work that this working group will continue to do and the way that it's going to help FirstNet. So I just wanted to recognize Brian specifically for that and thank him.
So does anybody have any questions for our work group chairs before we move on to the next topic? Nope. Okay, cool. Well, throughout the year, FirstNet has had outreach, discipline-specific, I have trouble with that word, specific outreach leads, and we thought it would be good to invite them here and kind of recap the activities that they've had since the last time we've gotten together. And some of them couldn't be here, so that's the hazards of a summer meeting. So we're going to turn it over to Dave Buchanan, who leads that whole group.
Thanks, Tom. Good morning. I'm Dave Buchanan, Director of Consultation for FirstNet. As Tom mentioned, for those of you who are new to the PSAC, we employ 4 senior advisors who provide leadership and expertise to FirstNet on law enforcement, fire, EMS, and 911 issues. We're going to give a report out on the activities we've done in those areas over the last 6 months and answer any questions you've got. I'm here in the role of representing Mike Bostic. Some of you may know he left FirstNet, took a job with AT&T. We're delighted for the time he spent with us, but we now have a vacancy for our law enforcement senior advisor. We'll be posting for that position this summer. And I just want to take a few minutes to talk about some of the activities we've been involved in the law enforcement area over the last 6 months. And you see here in the slide how busy we've been with most, if not all, of the law enforcement organizations here in the room: Major City Chiefs, IACP, Major County Sheriffs, NSA, many state associations. We get heavily involved in those conferences and your associations. We really appreciate your support in helping us be successful at those meetings. When we go to these conferences, particularly the national conferences, we exhibit our booth. We participate in as many panels as we can. We're involved in your committees. We like to speak at your executive committees, and we want to continue to work with you to take advantage of that and look for your help in helping us amplify the FirstNet message at your professional associations, your committees, as much as we can over the next 6 months and into the next year. I think we've been successful working with you in the past, and we want to continue to drive towards that. One particular event I want to call out specifically, we were hosted by Chief Lewin from Chicago PD, who's your new representative from the Major City Chiefs, back in May, and Major City Chiefs invited us to come participate in a roundtable focus group with their technology committee back on May 3rd in Chicago. It was a terrific conversation with AT&T, FirstNet, and the Major City Chiefs, chiefs and their representatives to talk about the FirstNet solution, to talk about the offering that AT&T is bringing to the network, to give a deep dive to those law enforcement practitioners and having a good conversation about how they might be able to take advantage and what they will be focused on when the network's available. Answered a lot, if not all of the questions during that 8-hour conversation. Really, I think was as good for FirstNet, if not better for FirstNet and AT&T as it was for the chiefs, for us to get that kind of feedback and get that kind of input. So as we drive towards delivering this network, we've continued this consultation effort we've been doing for 4 years now, and continue to understand the specific needs of what, in this case, police chiefs from the major cities want and need out of the network. I mention this also because we are in the process of getting ready to bring that kind of focus group to other conferences and other associations. Gary from IAFC is offered to help us with the bringing a focus group like this to the IAFC in July. We're going to work with many of you from your associations to continue to have that kind of consultation dialogue. If this is the kind of thing that you know your association is going to want to do, we'd be happy to come see me during the break or lunch, or send me a note. I'll be here all day and love to have that conversation. We want to do those over and over again. Again, we know that kind of consultation, that kind of dialogue brings us a lot of good information and good feedback about how to, again, bring the very best network to your members and get your inputs on that. Any questions from, or Chief Lewin, do you want to make any remarks about the Chicago meeting?
I want to echo what both you and Mr. Kennedy said. I think it was a great event. I think it was, for Chicago, it was a chance for us to kind of show how we're using communications today to get critical information to first responders, and we're very much looking forward to expanding that effort with FirstNet. So something I'm very excited about. I always say everything that we do depends on communications, and it's absolutely critical.
I actually have a question.
Please.
So in these focus groups, I think you called them.
Yep.
Do you envision having those be topical and like have an agenda, or do you envision kind of just an interaction, or both? I'm just curious how
Yep,
you
that's a great
envision
question,
that going.
Tom. So I think one way to look at it would be the focus groups, the meetings we have right now, I think would be more introductory to the solution and broad in nature, to make sure we cover the full landscape of elements of the offering and elements of the network that's on its way to the states and territories. I think if we think about the focus group we'll do a year from now, it may get very much more specific. We might have a focus group just around ICAM and police departments. We might have a focus group just around applications and what firefighters want, what applications are going to be most important to even volunteer firefighters. I could see us getting, and are going to drive our teams toward getting as specific as we can to meet the customers where they are, to have that consultative dialogue. And you hear Rich talk about this with our CCO organization. This consultation effort and this feedback loop with the customer and the public safety stakeholder will be something we're going to do for the life of the contract for the next 25 years. And we're really now getting started with that next phase of it through these 2017 focus groups.
Just something to add to that. I mean, I think one of the other things we did as part of the session with Chief Lewin is that we leveraged a very simple technology tool with the group, and we had chiefs and we had technical leadership from different big agencies. And one of the things we got into was a really good open dialogue about if you could have any kind of application that's going to solve a current critical need for your agency, what would that be? And everybody was able to take that feedback and just enter and kind of popping it up on the screen, and we were able to track that and turn that into a report that here are the things that different departments, and it was amazing to see some of the similarities and some of the differences. And it shows that there are things that I think will help every police department in the country, because there's a lot of similar needs, and there are things that will be more unique for a large department versus a medium department versus a small size department and things like that. Also, some of the most simple applications are still needed. There are things like, I think of like a field card app, something that's very, very basic and simple in law enforcement, but it doesn't really exist yet today. And I think one of the things that, the PSAC can do and these engagements can do is we can almost do some of that market research that's going to help drive the technology industry, drive companies and developers and others to create the solutions that you want on this network. And I think that was something that was very valuable and really got people thinking about how are we going to really transition our operations to the FirstNet network? How are we going to leverage the capabilities that the network will give us? And what will that be? And I think those were some of the really fruitful conversations that came out of that.
So I want to make one more comment about that.
Please.
One of the keys to the PSAC is that we generally have a more in-depth or broader view of this implementation, I'm going to call it now, I like that, than a lot of the boots on the ground kind of folk. And so one of the things I would strongly encourage you is to continue to keep the PSAC member that's representing that constituency in the loop, because we need to make sure we have not only what the locals want, but the broader perspective of how it fits in. And I think that's one of the keys that the PSAC can offer. And so I encourage you to keep the individual folks in that loop.
We'll do that.
Okay, any other questions or comments for?
Tom, Barry Frazier. I just wanted to thank Dave and his team. Last year I was approached by the International Municipal Lawyers Association who wanted someone to speak to them from FirstNet. And so I reached out to Dave, and he got, I think, Justin Shore and Kevin Green to do a webinar. Obviously, the city attorneys and county council, that could be a tough room, but they did a great job, and I know that organization appreciated your working with them, and I think they're going to be invited back to their national conference this year, or someone from FirstNet. But I just wanted to thank you for helping to set that up. I know that was appreciated by that organization.
Thanks, Barry. And I would just make a pitch for that. If any of your organizations have anything like that, webinars, outside of the typical conferences or this focus we're talking about, webinars, conference calls, other activities, we want to be available, work with me and Kenzie to get that scheduled, and we will support any and every one of your requests to do that where it's appropriate on the FirstNet topic. So thank you for that, Barry. Bill, you want to take the next slide?
Sure. Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity.
Hold on a second.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, just one comment. We are truly at a really exciting time now, and this last week at PSCR, I think, underscored that. We're going from a point in time when the presentations that we do to our disciplines about FirstNet go from these theoretical PowerPoint slides to real applications. We saw some amazing, you can actually put your hands on them, products that are coming out thanks to the funding that went to the PSCR for R&D. And I would really encourage all of us in our contacts with our associations and our disciplines to take a look at what some of those projects are, and to start using them in our presentations to our colleagues, because this stuff is really cool. And the cool factor is going to push us, it's going to accelerate us into this next stage fairly dramatically. When I see, for instance, a holographic CPR mannequin on a table that you need some lenses to look at, and they can hit severe respiratory distress, and that guy makes me nervous. That's cool. So we should work these kinds of things, take a look at what's being worked on, and put those into our presentations.
Yeah, there was some really cool stuff. The LiDAR mapping, they walked the river walk 4+ miles, and then rendered a holographic map of it in less than an hour. I mean, and they did flyovers. It was like Mission Impossible or something. I mean, it was really, really cool. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. So, Bill, I think you're up.
Thank you, Tom, and good morning. I always welcome the opportunity to talk about the success we're having with our outreach and engagement activities with the public safety communications community. I think it's worth noting that in 2016 alone, we were successful in participating in 55 events in 35 states. So we were pretty busy with our outreach and engagement efforts with the PSAP community around the country, who were very enthusiastic and supportive of what we're, of course, trying to accomplish through FirstNet. And they've come to fully appreciate and realize the value that relationship will have to next generation 911 as the two networks converge at the public safety communication centers across the country. This year we're on track to participate in about 25 events. We're being a little bit more strategic in our using our resources and our efforts, but nonetheless we continue to actively work with our associations and our state chapters to make sure that the public safety communications officials around the country fully appreciate and understand, again, the relationship and the value of bringing FirstNet into the public safety communication systems. I would particularly want to acknowledge and thank APCO, NASDA, and NINA for their ongoing support and for FirstNet and for my participation in some of these state events where, particularly in NASNA's case, I have welcomed the opportunity to co-present with many of the state 911 administrators around the country to give an update to their memberships as well. I'd like to begin with thanking APCO. APCO has been a great partner. I think certainly during my time with FirstNet, every APCO event I've attended has involved FirstNet, weaved either directly or indirectly throughout the theme of your events, so we're very grateful for your support. I also want to acknowledge the work that you do with Project 43 to help the public safety communications community begin to anticipate the impact of next generation 911 technologies on their networks. And Martha, I'd like to give you an opportunity to share any comments or thoughts that you might have.
Well, first, I want to say thank you for the kind comments. APCO has been looking for a way to educate our members as well as to assist the FirstNet in this initiative. And so now we're excited to be part of this implementation. And you're right, we've gone from a concept to now an implementation stage. But anyway, thank you very much for those comments. A year and a half ago, APCO started an initiative known as Project 43, and I'm sure that you've heard about it over the last 18 months. But we are in the final editing stages. We are about 3 weeks out from having the report ready to go to the printers. We're making final edits now. We have already set up an initial website that will go live during our conference. We're very excited about being able to roll out the report at our conference in Denver. But one of the things that we want to share is, of course, that, you know, we've used almost 100 different subject matter experts. We have gone across associations, across jurisdictions, and using those subject matter experts to start looking at what can we do to prepare our PSAPs for the future of the implications and impact of broadband. While, of course, we look at what can we do to assist providing the best tools for our public safety agencies, I think one of the things that we're focusing on is what is going to be the impact to our operations in our call centers. So we've looked at the governance, the operations, the technology, the workforce, cybersecurity, and the technology pieces to prepare our membership, but also to share that information across our associations. So we also look at this project as the beginning. We feel like that based upon what we've seen in the report, that this is just going to scratch the surface, that we see this as the first step, because we look at then this being a launching point for APCO for the future in how we assist in curriculum development, our standards work, occupational analysis for the personnel. What do we do to prepare our emergency communication centers of the future for that impact? We want to say thank you so much for the kind words. I'll take that back to my fellow board members and our APCO staff who's done a great job. But I think more importantly is that we look at ultimately what can we do to better support our public safety agencies, but ultimately the public that we serve, because they are driving the expectations. Because of what they can do now, they are driving the expectations. And so we want to remember, first off, what can we do to better serve our public? But anyway, thank you so much. We're anxious to share as soon as we get the website. Of course, we will be broadcasting that out so that not only will you be able to get a hard copy of it, but at conference you'll be able to hear and see and get the results firsthand about what the project is about. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. Appreciate it. I know how valuable that's going to be ultimately to the public safety communications community, and this is really the benefit of having a membership in an association like APCO, is to have the benefit of that kind of information. I'd like to turn to Richard Taylor, representing NASNA. Just last week, I was back here in San Antonio for the NASDA semi-annual meeting. NASDA has been wonderful about giving us an opportunity to participate in their membership meetings twice a year, and I know that they have a number of questions that we're still attempting to answer now that we have our partner AT&T working with us to respond to those issues. But we'd like to give you, Richard, an opportunity to say a few words about NASDA and your contributions.
I don't know if I can say anything in a few words, but I'll certainly try. Just like we've already heard this morning, NASDA is very excited of the progress that has been made, especially over the last few months. Listening to Chief Johnson speak yesterday, I've heard those very same stories from my counterparts across the country, saying this will never happen, it'll never be. But I'm hearing it in stereo because I've got, FirstNet in one ear, but Next Gen 911 in the other ear. And I think that's probably one of the biggest concerns that NASDA has, and we've shared those concerns with the leadership at FirstNet, is that we want to be sure that we're not building two separate networks that won't talk to each other. The 911 centers, we all know, will probably be the heartbeat of all of this. They're going to be where that information's coming in and where that information's going out, just as 911 has always been. They're looking out for our first responders and being sure they've got the right information to look out for the public and look out for their safety as well. But I think there are several issues that the NASDA membership still has concerns with. We've talked with Bill and with Jim Bugale about last week in San Antonio, getting to love the Riverwalk. And I don't need LiDAR to navigate my way, but it was nice to hear that the folks at PSCR got lost on the Riverwalk trying to find the restaurant. And they are a lot geekier than I am. And I was with my wife, and that was just terrible because she was saying, go this way, I go that way. Anyway, but I think the issue of cybersecurity between FirstNet and Next Gen 911 is going to be huge for everyone. Data interoperability is huge. The shared services and the infrastructure, that is again concerns that we're having, that we just don't want FirstNet and Next Gen 911 to be operating in silos. We need to be sure that these issues are being addressed, and those are the concerns we have. And I do want to reach out and say thank you to Bill Hinkle and all of the outreach folks have done a good job. Not always getting us the answers we want to hear, but at least they're listening and trying to find the answers out for us. So we thank you for that.
Thank you, Richard. And like APCO, I want to thank.
Bill.
Sorry.
I'd just like to make a comment about some of the things you said. I think you're right on. I think, from my perspective, I think what shouldn't be lost in this group is that once FirstNet gets deployed and people opt in and you start to see adoption, I think then we have to turn to the next tier of issues. And those things are Next Generation 911. It is Project 43 and how we rethink the role of PSAPs, everything from how images come in and how dispatchers really become the first part of an investigation or the first part of incident command, because they will have some tactical picture before people roll out the door in many cases. And that's really going to change their job from a broker to a thinker and a processor and kind of that stage one of the response. And then there's also this layer of how do we integrate all the technology platforms beyond Next Gen 911. We have OnStar and Central Station Alarm Association and in-building systems, and how those technologies and chunks of information get in the hands of responders, and when does it get in the hands of responders. We have big issues to tackle operationally, and we're going to need the technology director and directors and all the people around this table to take those on, because I think there are market forces that try to force these things apart due to everything from proprietary technologies to whatever. And these companies are trying to differentiate themselves and trying to carve out their unique services they offer. It's not in our best interest. Yeah, what's in our best interest is take these technological approaches and make sure there is some interoperable subsurface technology that allows them to interoperate. And I think it's going to be one of the greatest challenges you folks have as a group. Thank you.
So I'm going to comment as well, since you said that. To all the chiefs in the room, fire chiefs, police chiefs, others that have responsibility for funding communication centers, as a former director of a communication center, I can tell you I know of very few that have enough staff. I don't know of any that are overstaffed. And so when you think about new technology, new capabilities, new responsibilities for your dispatch folks, your comm center folks, you need to be thinking about staffing and augmenting the staff. Generally speaking, every time I take a technology project to City Council, they want to know how many employees can I cut to implement this technology. Once I implement it, how many employees is it going to save? You got to have a story. You got to have a pitch for why you need more people, why you need to pay them more, why you need to have a higher capability. And it's something that the 911 people, the comm center managers, cannot do without the chief of police, the fire chief, the EMS chief, and those kind of folks coming together and saying, we got to have this. And I personally see that as one of the biggest challenges of NG 911. If you really want your comm center staff to become more than they are now, which is running around with their hair on fire most of the time because they don't have a near enough folk, then it's going to require a cross-sectional effort from the agency heads to make that happen. So that's my political statement. I'm done.
I will take a moment to recognize the terrific assistance that we've been receiving from APCO, or I'm sorry, I'm looking at Trey and thinking about APCO, from Nina. Just last week again, we were given the opportunity to do a breakout session at Nina's National Conference, which was standing room only, well attended. There's been a renewed interest, of course, in all things FirstNet these days. And so we're enjoying capacity crowds at all of our presentations. I particularly want to thank Nina for their renewed interest and willingness to work with us on some messaging for the public safety communications community on what public safety needs to do eventually to interface with FirstNet. I also want to thank you for, I know you mentioned to me yesterday that your board has been encouraged to go out and proactively support opt-in. So we appreciate all of that advocacy and help as well. And Trey, I'd like to give you an opportunity to say a few words about Nina's efforts.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you for engaging with us. In fact, I pulled up some of the metrics here. The FirstNet session at our annual conference here in lovely San Antonio was one of the top 15 sessions out of over 120 that we put on. So obviously a subject of great interest for our members. I also really want to associate myself with Tom's remarks because the Communications Center, the PSAP, really is evolving very rapidly to be much more than it has been in the past. And I think if we all take a deep sort of introspective look, it has been much more than we've thought it was for some time. You know, there used to be the saying going around, I even heard it used in Washington by people who should have known better, frankly, but, 911, they're just the secretaries. You know, they work for us. They're just the secretaries. Don't you worry about them. Well, 911 telecommunicators and dispatchers are not just secretaries. Anybody who's ever been inside a PSAP can tell you they do far, far more than that. Their role is much bigger. As Jeff pointed out, they are in large measure the incident commander before there is an incident commander. And in some cases, they have a better picture of what's going on than folks on the ground do, you know, given the technology and the location capabilities that we have now for assets. Implementing next generation 911 and doing it in parallel with the rollout of FirstNet is going to be a key challenge. Time-wise, we've got a lot of work to do. We've got a lot of challenges on the funding side, as Tom noted. We are, pleased, I appreciated Jeff's comments about things like telematics and sensors and so on. The great news on that is thanks to some very, very forward-thinking standards developers in the public safety community, that functionality is built in to Next Generation 911. That was something, and I got to give these folks credit because they thought about these sorts of things 10 years, in the early 2000s, 10 years before anybody else thought that would be an issue, and they built it into the I3 standard for NG 911. So we're ready for that. We're, to Tom's point, we've got to start figuring out how we're going to plan and train for that. And we've got to do that in concert with the field responders that our members are going to have to push that information out to. We've got to figure out what do you want, when do you want it, and how do you want it, so that we can make that available in a way that is right for the field responders. And I appreciate, Bill, your efforts to connect us and to participate in those processes as we go forward. There is still a lot of work to be done, both on the technical side and on the operations side. We've got to make sure that we keep current both with how the public is communicating. We have to be able to ingest communications in the way that they're using them, which is no longer just, a carrier network telephone call. It's much more than that. And we also have to be able to integrate with the changing ways that our colleagues in the police, fire, and EMS communities are operating in the field. Those are going to change radically. As both of those sides of the connection change, our role in the middle is going to change radically as well. We may, to Tom's point, we may have folks that are video analysts or photo analysts. The 911 centers are going to become intelligence centers. A lot of what we do will change radically, and it's great to be in partnership with FirstNet and to know what that side of the picture is going to look like technologically and in the future operationally as we prepare for that. So thank you very much, Bill, for your outreach efforts, and to the rest of the FirstNet team for engaging with us.
Thank you, Trey. I want to repeat one important aspect of the work that I do, and that is and I mentioned this last year, and I want to repeat it again this year, without exception, there is a tremendous appreciation in the 911 community for FirstNet's efforts to engage them in this discussion. I mean, if nothing else, I mean, there are always some questions, right? But there is always an acknowledgement of how much the public safety communications community appreciates the fact that they're part of the discussion. And so I want to thank you on their behalf as well for your support for public safety communications. Thank you.
Okay, Brent, I think you're up.
Hi, everybody. Brent Williams. I'm the Senior EMS Advisor to FirstNet. I won't belabor a lot of the points. You can read what's on the slide. And I certainly agree with the comments that Dave and Bill have made. It's been a lot of fun and a real interesting journey over the last year and a half or so that we've been doing these outreach efforts. Kevin McGinnis from the board and I have said for a long time that EMS could very well be one of the biggest users of FirstNet when it's fully deployed. We just see so many opportunities, and the challenge for us has been to help EMS practitioners and EMS leaders around the country get their arms around what that means and help them understand it all. I think the biggest challenge we have is what I like to call the balkanization of EMS. We have national organizations, and 3 of them are right here on the PSAC, and they've been tremendously helpful with us. We work well with them, and they're great. The problem, though, is that EMS is regulated and is very much state-specific. Every state is different in the way they do EMS, the way they license it, the way they educate, the way they train. We have some national standards, but again, it's largely state-specific. So a lot of our efforts, as you can see just from the things we've been covering, a lot of them are state-specific. We work there. We do work with the national groups. There's a couple of big national conferences that we get to every year. But my focus really has been on the state ambulance associations, the the EMS practitioner groups in each of the states at the state level, the state EMS offices, the regulatory offices, and typically in the health departments of the states. They've been tremendously helpful to us, and we do get to those national conferences too. We have a bigger booth that we can use. We use it in some of all the different disciplines. That comes out of Ruston, but each of us as individual subject matter people have our own little smaller booth package that just travels with us. It goes as part of our checked luggage. And so we get to a lot of these conferences with just a small booth type of thing that we can take along. I've really noticed a big surge in how much the word about FirstNet has gotten out. The first year or so, we were lucky when we do a presentation to a group if 10% of the people raised their hand that they'd even heard anything about FirstNet, much less understood it or grasped what it could do. They'd never even heard the word. They knew nothing about it. That's changing. It's changing rapidly, and we're starting to see it. We're starting to see real excitement in the EMS community about what this can do. What we're seeing at the bigger conferences, the bigger state level and the national conferences, is a real noticeable surge in the apps and devices for EMS use. Kevin's mentioned a couple already. We heard more about some of the stuff in the pipeline here at the recent meetings earlier this week. Tremendous stuff. Apps that allow for far better integration and delivery of information from the field back to the medical oversight in the emergency department. Anybody who's worked in EMS or in a hospital emergency room, you're familiar with the whiteboard and the grease pencil. The ambulance calls in the current day, and we say the old days, and you call in and you got a 55-year-old male and he's got chest pain and we're 10 minutes out, and maybe a couple of other notes, and the charge nurse usually takes the call and she takes a grease pencil and writes on this whiteboard, this is what's coming in. Well, those days are going to be gone pretty quickly. There are multiple app developers now that literally take the raw data from the field, all of the data that the paramedics looking at from their monitoring equipment. They aggregate it all together, along with an EKG and a picture and a GPS plot of where you are and what your estimated arrival time at the hospital is. So, and it's all presented on a video screen in a format that's easy for the docs to use. And it's drawing tremendous amounts of interest when we see that. That's just one example of things, the kinds of applications that will use the FirstNet network. Telemedicine, the whole field of telemedicine, that's where healthcare is going, keeping people out of the hospital. EMS is going to be at the forefront of that, delivering that. And to do that, they need better communication back into the hospital, into the physician oversight. FirstNet can provide that. Remote patient sensing. We're almost up to the Star Trek tricorder type thing. There are literally hands-off sensors. They do a scan of the forehead. They come up with your blood sugar, your pulse rate, your blood pressure, your blood sugar level. I mean, all kinds of things. And those kinds of sensors are what will be feeding into the information transfer from FirstNet. We see rural EMS really benefiting. And Kevin's had a real emphasis for years on rural EMS, and we're seeing some real excitement in the rural areas. It's really building now. That FirstNet is really going to make a difference in the delivery of not only EMS care, but that community piece, that community paramedicine piece out in the field. So we're just seeing a lot of things, a lot of excitement. It's growing all the time, and I've got to say I've had a lot of different careers and a lot of different jobs in my life. And this is by far the most exciting one. I don't say that because my boss is sitting here next to me. But this has been, I mean, the federal government has its own challenges, and that's always going to be there. But working with FirstNet has been just a dream come true for me, and I really enjoyed it, really representing you, and I appreciate all the input that you folks bring to us to help us do our jobs better.
Brent, go ahead.
As Brent said, and Brent has been doing a great job the last couple of years, we've gone from the 10% in the audience to half, three-quarters knowing for what FirstNet is all about, and very anxious to hear about apps, no question about it. There will be one unfortunate thing, and Brent just mentioned it, the whiteboard and grease pencil in the emergency department has spawned some really great acronyms that nurses just throw up. So we all know, everybody, we're going to miss those, the LOL, FDGB, little old lady fall down, go boom. Everybody knows that one.
Little old lady fall down, go boom. So
DRTs.
So I just want to add a couple of things, and it has been amazing for me to watch this happen, being the EMS representative on the PSAC as well. And Brent's original comment about how EMS is going to be a major user of FirstNet, I think the reality of that is the fact, as in his presentation he mentioned to you, how that most of the EMS agencies are under state regulation, which is true. And that's where my expertise is, and we've been involved with the states with dealing with that. But the second, and then that are also, most of them are with health departments, which is also a true fact. But that brings in an interesting dynamic to EMS. Most EMS agencies, not all, you can give me the ones that don't, bill for their services. And they collect revenue back, and they bill per transport, and they bill for mileage hauled. So you take a patient, you go 10 miles, and you bill X number of dollars to the patient. The Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, has reimbursements that they pay back to providers. And so this is an industry where people are used to getting revenue. Revenues generated by the transport of the patient. They also can bill for what they do. So as they hook up a monitor, as they do whatever, they add an add-on charge as you get into your hospital setting. And as we look at that, it opens up a whole new world that I don't think we've totally explored that possibility for FirstNet and for the devices, as how EMS providers can have the ability, if they choose to, now in like Doug's case where he works for a total volunteer agency sort of, they may not bill. There are a few out there that don't, but 90+% of the providers bill for their services, and revenue comes back either to the city, the county, or the agency. Because of that, we have an untapped source of revenue where they can add on as a charge to their billing charges for things that they do, applications that they use, whatever it is, similar to what you use if you go on a cardiac arrest and you use a defibrillator, you're able to bill for that as well as all the other parts that are there. And I don't think we've really captured that yet. I know TJ and I've had a conversation about it, but with that, it kind of opens up the world of EMS, and I think that's why we've always said they're going to be a big user, because they can afford it. They do now, and they can add the extra charges to do that. So that's something that I think we need to kind of look into more as now we're getting into the implementation phase and how we move forward, because you've got all the providers out there that do have and through CMS and others, they have the capability of being able to bill for that. That's something that doesn't happen in fire or law enforcement as much, because you don't have a lot of people who allow you to bill for coming and putting out the fire, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of that. I know 911 has that with the dispatch centers, and Trey and I have talked a little bit in the past about that, how they get money from, the fees that come from taxes on your phone usage. So they have that capability as well. But in EMS, I think that's something we haven't explored, Dave, Brent, and Kevin, that we need to kind of look into a little bit more, because that opens up a whole new world of what we can do to the majority of the providers. You can give the anecdotal one or twosies that are totally private and volunteer all their time, but we're seeing a big shift now that most of them are municipal agencies that bill for, collect money, and pay for their services. So anyway, but a big thanks to Brent and Kevin and everybody for what they do.
So this is Tom. I have a question. I don't know if it's for Brent, for Paul, or Kevin. So one of the things that, now that I live in the IT world, we do metrics for everything. And so one of the things that I've noticed over my years in public safety is we very rarely establish a baseline for anything. And so we preach that we get this new technology, this new capability, it's going to do X, but we don't measure what it is before we get it, and then we can never prove that it actually did what we said it was going to do. And so as the SMEs for FirstNet, I would really encourage you to look and see if there's opportunities to help the agencies or the states or whoever create baselines so that we can get some metrics about operational improvements, efficiencies, whatever, to help further drive adoption down the road.
I'll jump in with one quick comment, and Kevin may have some too, because this is a big area for him. one of the areas we've been trying to emphasize is working with the emergency physicians. There's a National Association of EMS Physicians, very active, the EMS medical directors, people like that. They're the people who drive technology use out in the field by the paramedics. They're going to drive it. And the first question they ask is, well, what will using technology like this do for my patient? How will it change? And one thing I've learned in all my years in EMS, I mean, I've been licensed as a paramedic in Michigan since 1978, so I've been around the block a couple times. Yeah, we've been around the block a couple times. But the danger we run into when we have new technology is that the technology we can get so busy with the technology that it keeps us from actually touching our patients and doing the hands-on care that's so a part of medical care. And so we have to always be watching for that. And Tom, there's a real push in the EMS community for evidence-based medicine. We're finding out that a lot of the things we've done traditionally that just kind of made sense really haven't helped much. And a lot of the things that I learned over the 20, 30, 40 years ago, masked pants and just a lot of the things we've done just aren't proving to be really helpful. So there's a real push for evidence-based work.
I would just say, if you guys got into EMS at the same time, you look much younger than him. I don't know what it is. So Don,
I was gray then. So
Don,
I'm not a high school grade.
I was only 6 when I got
So
into
if
it.
there's anybody else down at that
Here we
end of
go,
the
yeah.
table, I'm having
We're going to
trouble
start
seeing.
counting who can go back the farthest, all right? So 1974, let's see anybody beat that. This is great. I mean, the conversation, first of all, I mean, Brett and Kevin have been awesome ambassadors for EMS, and I want to spend maybe a minute reminding people of a few things that I was blessed to have a brother who sat in the newsroom of the St. Paul Pioneer Press. Anybody know about them? They won a Pulitzer. I had a little story about the Gopher basketball team that they hired a woman to write all their term papers, and they found out about it, and they broke the story, the day before the championship game. So I'm honored to have a brother who's the governor, Ventura, called, and I quote, a lecherous scumbag. I'm honored that he does. But this brother was the one that called me up one night and said, listen, there's something with these computers coming into our newsroom. They're telling us that we're going to editorialize and be able to edit stories on computers. Now, that's just not true. That's crazy. We're never going to have computers in every station. And he was convinced it wasn't going to happen. If we go back a little further, my father-in-law was lucky enough to sit in on a meeting of about 160 engineers in a little town called Titusville, Florida. And nobody really knew the meeting was taking place, and they said, "Look, listen, guys, we're going to send a man to the moon and put him on the moon and bring him home." And he reminded me up to the day he died of the two questions that were asked. One statement was, we can't do that. That was the first thing that came out of the engineer's mouth. And the question that was often asked was, why not? So when we start this process, when we think about how far we've come on this and the cool apps that are out there, I want to make sure that we remember the boots on the ground, and it was perfect when you brought up a lot of times we don't do measurements, so we don't know whether it got, well, we already have measurements. Everybody remember the map, I think it was 2.5 years ago, in which we didn't have connectivity. Remember it? Mostly out west, little spots in almost in every state somewhere that there was no connectivity, and that meant the medic on the ambulance could not speak to the medic 40 feet down the road, no less talk to the hospital. Those are the people who are excited about this process. And while the apps are going to be awesome, and we're going to have now a map that instead of says rerouting, she's going to say, why did you turn there? It's going to be awesome. We have to remember that unless we can make the connectivity for the medic on the ground who is just hoping to be able to talk to the system next door who comes every day to help them, but they can't talk between themselves. The rest of it, and I don't mean to minimize it, but the rest of it is fluff. If we can't make that connectivity between the medic and law enforcement and firefighters who have systems next door who commonly come and help them because they're too small, they're too rural, they're too busy and don't have enough equipment to be able to talk to them I'll use this term one more time, it was 10 years ago and forgotten, on a one-box solution. Please don't give me another radio. That's what I need, is another radio on my belt just to have my pants totally come down under the weight. The one-box solution to be able to talk to the medic next door or talk to the other medics and firefighters on the baseball field when shooting's going on, or talk to the medics in the same building while it's on fire. If we can't compete to the point of getting that done, then the primary mission we will have just missed. So I want to keep the excitement going. I'm very excited about what I've seen, some of the technology that comes out. But I always remember Medic Joe on the ground wanting to speak to the hospital that's probably 3 miles away, and he knows that he can't. And I'll remind you, I doubt if you know this, the first 5 systems in the United States that had written protocols, and for those that don't know EMS, it was something brand new. Hillsborough County, Florida was one of the 5, and they wrote a book that doctors signed off and said, you don't need to talk to me, you can do all these things, and you don't need to get orders. It was awesome. It was fantastic. We were going to be able to treat a patient without trying to get them on the radio. What most people don't realize, at least in Hillsborough County, the reason that was written is because we couldn't get the physician on the radio because the radio system had not been built out to the point of more than 40 miles away. So we wrote the protocols because we had to. I don't want systems that say, I really want FirstNet, but now I've got to write a protocol because I still can't talk to my neighbor next door. I hope that stays as the primary, both with law enforcement and fire, that the connectivity is always at the foundation of everything we do. And the apps that we get done are going to be awesome. But I can tell you from the boots on the ground, if they can't talk to the medic next door, we will not have done our job. So.
As I mentioned earlier, I can't see many of you way down there, so was there anybody else down there that wanted to get in? Because it's the bright lights in big city. Okay, let's move on. Kinsey, I think you're up next.
Thank you, Tom. I am here on behalf of Mike Borrell. He is currently actually at the IAFC Hazmat Conference in Baltimore that you see up there. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of some of the recent outreach events that Mike has completed. The thing that we wanted to highlight about his attendance at the FDIC was not only that he found a great amount of traffic, but also a large amount of interest in the AT&T and the FirstNet partnership. And that was spread over almost 34,000 attendees from 58 countries. So he was pleased to report how far the word has spread there. Also, at the IAFC Metro Chiefs meeting recently, they discussed a resolution of support that will be reintroduced to the Metro Chiefs after our state plans are released later this month. At the Oklahoma Fire School and the Boston Fire Department Tech Roundtable, the data evolution in fire services and the future role of FirstNet were the topics that he pointed out as having the most amount of discussion. And I think that it's interesting also, Tom, to note that he has heard that a tool to look at when priority and preemption is utilized would help evidence the value of FirstNet. I think that ties back into what you just said. In terms of future outreach events, the importance and the effectiveness of having members at booths and speaking with FirstNet staff has been very successful. And I'd like to ask Lieutenant Billy Freeman to highlight some of those future events and messaging.
Sure, and thanks to Mike for always piling stuff on me. He and I have been teaching and deploying in the USAR program for about 15 or 16 years, so we sync up really well. Mike and I the state of Tennessee is where I've been mostly involved in keeping Mike posted on what's going on in fire, and he and I collaborate quite a bit on what he's writing and those kind of things relative to the fire. So he traveled with us in our traveling circus back about a month ago. We do a state conference, which I saw, Brent, you're coming. You had that on your list. Yeah, it ought to be good. I'll talk about that in a second. We do 3 regionals, West, Center, and West, Middle, and East. They were two-day events, and we did it one-day events this time because we've always made sure that we did updated information, not just the same information over and over again. And we got quite a bit of feedback talking about, great, appreciate the new updated information. But Mike and I did a session together, and talking to the group, the slides were very minimal, about 6 or 8 slides, but they were all just bullet points. We wanted to interact with the group and got a lot of information out of the group. We asked a lot of questions. They brought a lot of questions back to us, and I'll just touch on a few of the things, questions we got and questions we asked. So we'd start out by asking them, who was doing data at some capacity. The first thing I asked them is, who has a computer that makes phone calls in their pocket? And but we got down to the mobile data terminals, and I run that program for the city for the Memphis Fire Department currently, and we talking about efficiency. Why data is efficient as opposed to a land mobile radio, not taking over the land mobile radio piece, but why is it efficient? And we use several examples. The Memphis Fire over the past few months have had several large events. One, we had our CAD go down for about 4 hours, and we had a 400% increase in radio traffic because they didn't have buttons to push. And then we had a 100-mile-an-hour straight line windstorm midnight on a Sunday night, which filled our MDT terminals up with information. Every piece of equipment, we have 100 pieces of equipment. Every one of them, actually we have 100, with the ambulances we have 135. Every one of them was out on calls. So if those of you that have been in that situation before know that the radio is practically impossible to communicate on. And so there was a lot of data moving across there. We did talk about dispatch centers, asking them questions. How can it help dispatch? How can data help dispatch? Giving them more information. We talked about a minute ago being the first group to get a situational awareness of what's going on the call. And as you can get that additional information, that helps them to prioritize and send the right resources, and we know that. The other one was unaccounted data use, and that was one that stumped most people. They don't consider what that means. My son is a paramedic, firefighter paramedic on Memphis, and he's 28 years old, and so they are used to having this, and so it's that unaccounted data use is those guys sitting in the back of the rig typing in EMS the protocols, something's odd, or they're getting drug data and they're using their own device. And there's a lot of that. There's a huge percentage of that goes on that needs to be accounted for. So we asked a few more. We asked quite a few. We got great interest. Mike and I have, like I said, we've been teaching together for about 15 or 16 years, and so we pretty good with a crowd. Although I'm very shy. So we ask them questions, and try to give them information in 1 year, 3 year, 5 year planning. What do you expect from FirstNet? And one of the biggest pieces was the rural areas. That's the group, and we've talked about that. Everybody knows that piece, but that rural area is the one that there's a couple of pieces to that. And the rural area is there's not a lot of money in the rural areas. These are a lot of volunteer departments. They're bringing their own devices. They are using off-the-shelf apps. There's a security piece there, those type things, and they were concerned, or they don't have the connectivity, and that's one of the ones. That's the rural area which by the way is the largest group of firefighters in this country. Even though I represent the International Association of Firefighters. I also represent non-management firefighters, so I represent the boots on the ground. I am a boot on the ground. I represent the boots on the ground, and the largest group of fire and EMS in this country are volunteers in rural areas. And so they are concerned with that. And another question that we asked them and got consistently was, when this thing comes online, will I continue to have input? Fire, police, EMS are notorious for getting things handed to them and say, make it work. Now, we're tenacious enough to make it work, but that's what I expect from this group. I'm proud to be part of, for us to represent those people, to continue to let them have that voice. And I think the group agrees with that. One other one that came out, and so we went to East Tennessee, and they had, those of you who may have heard, the Gatlinburg fires in East Tennessee. We don't have wildfires in Tennessee. Our stuff is green. It just so happens they were in a drought situation, and it was the perfect storm that blew through. I was up there just about a month ago, and it was pretty heartbreaking to see. But their biggest piece was data has become this have to have. Mike Orell always told me, the Memphis Fire Department just fielded their stuff. I just fielded MDTs 2.5 years ago, and we had never had them. And Mike said within 6 months they can't do without them. Well, like Mike always does, he lied to me. It only took 4 months. And so I have 3 emails on my phone right now on problems with the system. So they, especially when you have mutual aid coming in, that's a rural area, and you had mutual aid coming in from large departments, the deployable piece was they understood that. They brought in deployable LMR resources. They didn't get the data resources as quick as they would have liked. So that's a big piece. So Mike and I had a good time going down through there, talking to the fire and EMS, the folks, and Brent, you're going to have a good time. We do a tabletop, and our table we've built on our tabletop every year for our state resource. We have 200 people. There's a waiting list right now trying to get into the conference, and this one is a hands-on. So we have AT&T is bringing a lot of assets. The military is bringing some assets. So we've put all these pieces together, and we'll do a tabletop, and then we will put our hands on it to solve those tabletop problems. So it ought to be good. We used Office of Emergency Communications, ICTAP, to build the exercise for us. So it ought to be good. There's AT&T's quite a few people that are coming to it as well. And so anyway, Mike and I have had a good time collaborating across the country on and touching as many fire and because they go hand in hand, EMS together. So that was all right.
Absolutely. Thank you, Billy. Is there anyone else? Chief, would you like to say anything about IAFC's work recently?
Larry's got it.
Larry, Sheriff Amerson has a question.
Just a thought. This is going to change for law enforcement. In 42 years of rural law enforcement, I've stood at many wreck scenes. I've stood at incidents where people are injured, needing medical care, and we can't do anything. But if these devices we're talking about, you put them in the hands of the law enforcement people, we can at least send some preliminary information back to the first medical responders to start facilitating what kind of treatment they need and make some changes. So it's going to put us, I know in some places law enforcement does medical care, but that's the exception. So tremendous opportunity to put tools in the hands of other people that can assist getting that care to the patient. Thank you.
I would just echo what the sheriff has to say. There's a device now, there's an app right now, and I have it on my phone when it doesn't fall off. And you can do an EKG by just simply putting a phone on your fingers like that. And it's actually a fairly good quality EKG. Good enough so that a sheriff, a non-medical sheriff, or an
Even
EMS.
a sheriff.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. And this,
I think you did.
No. Jeez. This paramedic is not getting between these two. Or a medical first responder who doesn't normally do EKGs could send a strip ahead to me in the ambulance going to the scene, and I can have a much better picture of what I'm going to encounter. It's already here.
And it impacts your speed of your response.
Sure.
Many times ambulances are running wide open to a very, very minor event.
I feel a need, since Harlan's not here, to say at least the law enforcement folks are awake and fed. Anyway, go ahead, Kenzie.
Awake, but maybe not well rested, right? Okay.
We've said his name 3 times now. He will appear.
Thank you, Kenzie. Mike specifically has been very active with the IFC community. As somebody mentioned earlier, he's in Baltimore right now at our Hazardous Materials Conference. That group is really interested in the capacities that FirstNet brings to the table with biometrics and things of that nature, things that today certainly aren't available, but really have life-changing impacts to the firefighters in the field. We'll be running in conjunction with our conference at the end of July. The focus group for specifically, I think we're talking about apps to get the fire service a little bit more engaged in that. Mike is also, I know he's been to the state of Massachusetts to talk to fire chiefs in our annual conference, and I know he's been throughout the community doing that. So, I think we're like all other associations that maybe 2 or 3 years ago, nobody knew what FirstNet was, and now they're clamoring for more information. So, thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Are there any other comments, questions, remarks?
Kenzie, I guess from the volunteer perspective, the biggest thing that I'm seeing and hearing is, as with anything, it takes a little while to get out into the rural world. There's a lot of questions as to how this can be a force multiplier, how this can be a time saver, and what that's going to look like for them. I mentioned it at our conference, state conference, and I've got another one this weekend that I'll be covering once I leave here. But there's AT&T doesn't work here. I said, quit attaching that's what we keep getting feedback is well, it doesn't do this now, or it doesn't. They're trying to put what's current, I guess you would say, in their environment, and make that what they see FirstNet as. You see what I don't have a whiteboard behind me, and I'm used to having a whiteboard and a grease pencil. So, but that's the challenge we're getting out in the rural areas is a lack of understanding. There's still a concept of, well, is this going to replace radio? Because my radio doesn't work either. And trying to make sure there's an understanding of what it will not do, what the different phases are. And I hope we can do something at the National Volunteer Fire Council Conference in Nebraska in the fall, but most importantly in Alexandria this coming April, make sure we have a large FirstNet representation. And I'm going to call Dave on a break here and make sure we clear time to have the state's representatives to have access to more than just the local guy. I'm an idiot with a clipboard. If you're more than 75 miles away from home and have a briefcase, you're an expert.
Well, as you mentioned, we very much look forward to working with you and with all of the PSAC members on education and outreach and continuing those efforts to address all of the challenges that you mentioned. So If there are no other questions, please.
Just, I'm my first time here, so I'm not going to go too much into it, but I come from the legislative perspective, being a state legislator and now a county supervisor. And a lot of things I'm trying to implement with technology in my county does take a lot of legislative action at the state level. I'm just wondering, are we pairing up the technologies with the legislation? Because we could do all this great stuff in the field of my EMS to save my IEHP board, the 7th largest in the nation here for medical services, a lot of money. But if I can't have my doctor's bill or my paramedic's bill and those type of things, no one's going to change it because they're going to keep going back the same way they do to get their money. So I think paralleling as this technology comes forward and you put it in the field to have legislative efforts on that is very useful. Secondary, I have a large county. I run all the radio equipment for all my departments, 22 cities in the county. I want these integrations things, otherwise I'm not going to re-spend several hundreds of millions of dollars I just put in my 800 system. So, those technologies have to be worked hand in hand with the legislative body that has to pay for it. And I just want to make sure we have those efforts going on our local levels.
That's really good. Let me piggyback a little bit on that. One of the things that we talk about technology doing is providing efficiency. But if all of your billing is towards inefficient things, like medical transport is inefficient. I mean, if you can do it in the field without having to transport them, that's a much more efficient thing. But if there's no money attached to that and there's no way to get revenue, who's going to do it? So, I mean, that's a really great point, and I think we probably ought to look at that. I'm sure that you guys are looking at it, but I mean, a lot of the things we do are, especially on EMS, are task-oriented. They're, I do this task, I get this money for reimbursement, and if we're talking about avoiding tasks, where does that revenue come from?
Well, I think this was exactly where Paul was going earlier, is that it's not about, just focus on the revenue, but I think the point is, it's about enabling EMTs and paramedics to do their job more effectively and more efficiently, and sometimes that also includes local and state legislation or rules or regulation changes that will allow them to be reimbursed for those duties so that, additional technologies can be paid for. And I think also the FirstNet model is very good this way in that it's a service-based model, it's not a CapEx-based model, and in the opt-in scenario, there's not the huge CapEx that's quite often associated with a lot of the kind of projects that we do, and I think that will also enable a lot of departments, big and small, to leverage the technology because it's priced in a very different way.
Yeah, what that is true, TJ. This work there. Hold it down there. One of the key things that is reimbursable is if they can eliminate transport, like what you said, and so therefore you can get that revenue back. We need to make sure whoever provides that, i.e. the first responder, the fire, EMS folks, police, whoever's on the scene, are having a different revenue stream to be able to get that, because Medicare, Medicaid services would sooner pay that than have you take the person all the way to an emergency department, which has a quadruple bill. And so that's what I was meaning. We need to look at that. I don't think we have yet, but to maximize the true potential of what this network can mean to our first responders, providing service on the scene, especially in a medical sense, that will then not need to transport, kind of like what Dr. Pierce is doing in Houston. We talked about that yesterday. So that's exactly where we need to look at.
Just to highlight that, the fact is that today, CMS reimburses EMS if you transport a patient. It does not reimburse if you don't transport a patient. And so the incentive is to take, now in EMS, you think we're a life-saving business. Well, we are kind of. In less than 10% of the calls that we go on is anything life-saving actually going on. In less than 30 or 40% of the calls, does the patient really need to go to the hospital? And yet, if we don't transport them, we don't get paid. So the incentives are on their head. We are working to change those around. But all of the incentives or a lot of the incentives to pick up FirstNet so that we can do more for patients at the scene are not financially incentivized. So your point is excellent.
So any more questions or comments on that?
Just a comment. I know that, and I'll piggyback on Kevin's comments. At some point, we talked about the tons of revenue EMS gets for transporting patients. I just want to remind everybody, in case you didn't know, we're reimbursed 60%, not of what we charge, but what it actually costs. Think of starting a business where the federal government forced you to only accept 60% of what it costs, never mind what you were going to charge, to figure out how much money EMS actually has at the end of the day. So I just want to make sure everybody understood we're not sitting on a big pot of cash going, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, could we don't do that. So.
Charlie?
We appear to be recording, video recording this particular session, and I'd like to bring to Chief Johnson's attention that we got an overview yesterday of the inaccuracies associated with video recordings. And from a distance, the bottle that he's sipping from appears to be a beer bottle.
We're going to move on.
You say that like it's wrong.
And what's wrong with that, you say? So we'll move to the next topic on the agenda. Thank you. Is the Preparing for Adoption Task Team report. I would like to thank Chief McCarr for taking the lead role in chairing that group. Also, Jen Harder and Kenzie Capice provided a great deal of support in that. We've been working now for several months to come up with some pretty good products. And Gary, I'd like you to go ahead and review the preliminary findings.
Thank you, Tom. And I, too, would like to thank everybody who participated in the task force. We've been meeting nearly weekly since February, so it's really been a lot of time involvement, and I know it's difficult for everybody to carve out an hour a week for us. So, and Jen and Kenzie has really kept us on task and kept us focused, seemingly under impossible odds at sometimes. But as we referred to in the webinar, there are 7 differentiators that the task group came up with. And these are differentiators that we put out that are what is the difference between the FirstNet product and other commercially available products. We started our work, obviously, before the AT&T award. So some of this was theoretical, and we had some discussions, and some of this we certainly will be holding our partners' feet to the fire as we move forward. So the first differentiator was priority. Priority is the highest benefit of the FirstNet network by assigning levels of priority to public safety. We always ensure that we get the broadband network that we need when we need it. I was specifically pleased to see the AT&T process at PSCR the other day of how they'll move people and actually move past where we are into other bands. I think that has a true sell to public safety and gives us a level of comfort as we move forward. The quality of service is the robust data services such as streaming video that can be expected, maintain their qualities of speed. The identity, credentialing, access management, also known as ICAM, of how we access the system. Again, fresh off of where we've been for the last couple of days, the single signer protocol really has great breadth for public safety. Certainly, I won't speak on behalf of any other discipline, but firefighters like to do things once and not multiple times. If they do it multiple times, the device will end up broken at some point, probably immediately after the second time they have to sign in. Increased rural and urban coverage. The coverage will be strengthened. The capabilities of first responders in areas previously without connection will have connection. And we heard the Rural Fire Service specifically say that that's a big deal. Kevin, you've done a great job in harking how rural medicine is going to benefit from the increased coverage, and I think that's certainly something that we all look forward to. Security in terms of network user applications and devices. this is a crazy world we live in as far as people trying to bring down networks. We've seen that just recently. If we build a network only to have people be able to hack into it and tear it apart for us, we've done nothing for public safety. So security is a big differentiator for us. And increased reliability. In the fire service right now, we're having a discussion about voice versus just a data network, and that's a discussion that's ongoing. And I think it was Harlan several years ago in Westminster at PSCR, using the fire term, you don't want to stand in front of a burning building with people in the basement saying, "Can you hear me now?" And that's really, we understand, at least our level, and our challenge is to make sure that we tell our folks that, reliability and data is really the training wheels of the entire network. Once we get that right, we'll be able to move into to voice, and I think that really harkens, at least from the folks that I speak with. And the last, and probably as important, is the Public Safety App Store. Having well-vetted applications that folks can get to and access is an important issue. And again, organizationally, now we have something to make this whole system work. So those are really, in brief, the 7 differentiators. Our product will be a draft report, which is typical of all the other task groups that we've had on the PSAC, and that is in draft form. In addition to that, there's an informatics poster that talks to these 7 differentiators so that people can quickly see at a glance what the advantages of going to FirstNet are. And then there's a checklist. All 3 of those are currently under draft, and once we vet that out through the task force, we'll hopefully get approval to that and then move it forward to the entire PSAC for approval and then on to the board. So I'd be more than happy to ask or answer any questions you have.
Can I just add, the checklist is basically a checklist. It's envisioned for sharing with agencies that are contemplating adopting broadband and or FirstNet, right, for the first time. So we identified things that we felt the agency should consider as part of that decision and before proceeding with that decision. So that's what the checklist is. I just want to make that clarification. Questions, comments for Chief?
This is Walt from AT&T. I would really greatly appreciate learning more about the adoption committee. I'm leading up marketing for FirstNet at AT&T, so would love to learn more about what you guys are up to and pick your brains and potentially be part of what you guys are doing to help with the adoption efforts.
And I think once we complete our product of the task force, it'd be the best time to interact.
Sounds good.
Mel?
Tom, I just want to take a moment to thank Gary for being the task team leader on this. He did a good job. It was hard to wrangle this group together as well as define what we felt was our primary mission was to how to get this information out to the public and say, this is FirstNet, it's here. These are the products we want. And all the task team members for the time you put in, especially Jen and Kenzie also. So thanks, you guys did a really good job, and I think you're going to be very happy with this product.
Rich?
Thank you, Gary. We really appreciate the work you've done. It really is beneficial. And Walt, I just want to make a commitment. We will share this information with AT&T when it's in the right position. It's one of the reasons we invited you to participate, and we look forward to interacting with you over time.
Do we have more questions or comments on the adoption task team? I think we're running ahead of schedule, which may be a record for us. So I think we're 15 minutes ahead of schedule, which I'm not sure has ever happened in the history of the PSAC. We do like to talk. So
it's a
what I
credit to
really
your leadership, Tom.
So, Harlan, I just wanted to remind everybody of the whiteboard acronym we learned earlier. It's LOLFDGB. I'm going to remember that for always and forever. I may even buy a whiteboard and grease pencil just so I can write it down at home. Daryl will
tell you about that later.
You don't have a whiteboard at home?
I don't. I don't even have a grease pencil at home, I'm fairly sure. Since we're running ahead of schedule, one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that we're doing photos of the PSAC members so that we can put them on the webpage, and everybody will know who you are. But one of the other things we do traditionally at our in-person meetings is we also do a group photo, and so we're going to do that when we break, and we're going to do it immediately at the break so y'all don't get to run away and then we can't herd you back. So we're going to do it right out in the lobby. Yeah, you go left and somebody will follow you. For those on the call, we're ending the public session now, and thank you for joining us, and we'll resume after the photo and after the break at 10:30. So everybody please go out the door to the left.